Hi guys, Mike here. In this episode, we are looking at plugins. First, we enable all the plugins that come with Unreal that we will need in this series. And then we are going to create our own plugin that we will use for easier reusability of the code and the MMO framework we are going to create. So let's get started. So in Unreal, let's go to Edit, Plugins, and let's look first for the gameplay, or type in gameplay. So we need, it seems like it's enabled, the gameplay abilities. Make sure this one is enabled. Gameplay text editor. Then select modular gameplay. Then there's also one, meta sound. That is important. Yes. And there's also like game features. So we need game features, gameplay abilities, gameplay text editor, meta sound, modular gameplay. And then there's a plugin we can activate for now. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it. It's the enhanced input. So let's just enable this. Then search for landmass, which we will need for, let's say, laying out the basics of a terrain. And then there is one plugin, the modeling tools editor mode, which we might use to gray box our levels and stuff. So this is all what we need so far. So basically it's the gameplay. If you look at game, so it's the game features, the gameplay abilities for the ability system, text editor, then meta sound, modular gameplay, and these are the most important. Then enhanced input maybe, but we will see if we use this or not. So let's restart and I'll see you back in Unreal. And so after restarting, you might see this error like Asset Manager settings does not have an entry for the game feature data. So let's just click on this here. It automatically adds it and then the error is gone. Close it. And now we can leave this open. So we have all our plugins enabled that we need. And now it's time to create our new plugin. So let's create new plugin. That's really handy in here where I can create a plugin just from the plugins tab. Modules is a little bit different. We're not using a module for that, but rather really a plugin that we can then use and copy to all the projects that we need, and we have reusable code for that. So let's click new plugin. And what we need is a plank plugin. So later on down the road, when we probably use the modular game features, then these are also like plugins that go into a specific directory. You can see like these plugins that go into game features. They need to be in this specific directory to work, but we are using or creating a standard normal plugin, and let's call this MMO core. It's our core framework for the series that we are creating. So everything that uses OWS, and we're creating the widgets in C++, the player controllers, the characters, the ability systems, all that stuff we will put into our core system so that we can reuse it in other projects. And in the project itself, we are just creating blueprints on top of those for them to work. So let's create that plugin. So what you can type in, I can type my name, and you can give a description. So MMO core framework, for example. Let's create the plugin. It's generating the code and stuff. And the plugin was successfully created. Let's close this dialog, and Writer is opening up, or the IDE of your choice. So it's loading the solution. This is just an initial thing that takes some time in the beginning. For the first time, it's updating the source code, reading header files and so on. But after it's finished, all of that once, then you don't really need it anymore. It's not taking so long. But what we can do is, okay, writer is ready to use. We can have a look at our project. So what we can see here is under source, that's still our normal project files that we created, which is a module under source. And under plugins, now we have our OWS plugin that we imported. We have the MMO core, and even Rider put its own plugin in there. So under MMO core, it's similar to like a project. Instead of a uProject file, it has a uPlugin file, which we can open, and it's really similar to a uProject file, which has file versions, version names, modules that it uses, and the plugins basically that it needs. And for the plugin, we would need specific things as well. We have modules, and now to configure the plugin to work with OWS so that we can inherit from files, from classes in the OWS plugin. And if we look at our plugin itself, is kind of like a module also. So basically, like projects, plugins contain one or more modules, so we could add more modules to it, but we're only using the default one. And it has a public and private section for the header files and the CPP files. And what we are going to do when we create C++ files in there, we will also create subfolders for like a core section, for login, for abilities and different other things, so that we can structure our plugin into a hierarchy to better find and structure the files. So the next step that we really need to do is configure our build file. You can see like it is in a normal project where you have your build file here. The plugin also has a build file with all dependencies, 2 modules. So we need to add all that stuff in there in a few seconds and configure our plugin and project to use the MMO core plugin. And for the plugin, MMO core plugin, use the OWS plugin as a dependency. So before we go in and configure our plugin, let's first create our first C++ class in the plugin. So the way to do it here now, we need to click on C++ classes, right click, and then add new C++ class. What we want to do now is create our game instance, which inherits from the OWS game instance. So we click all classes and type in OWS game instance, and you can see here, this is the class we need to inherit from. So click next. And now what I want you to kind of like see is when you usually work with a normal project and you don't have any plugins, then your project name is here, and every class that you create ends up in the source folder of your project file. But we want to add a class now to our plugin. And so if you see our drop-down list here, you can see all these plugins available and where you can add classes to, and we want to select our MMO core plugin. So basically now it creates the class under plugins MMO core source MMO core, and for this class we put it into the root. Later on we just use different hierarchies like login, like core or base or in-game for different types of classes that we create. And we will call this not my OWS game instance, but we will call it MMO game instance. And we will create the class now and see it fail. And then we need to configure it to be able to compile and get it working. So let's create the file. And you can see public, the header file is put into public and the CPP file into private. So let's do this now, create a class. And we can see compile failed. So I don't want to output and don't want to show the log. Let's head over to Rider or Visual Studio here, because Rider also has like Git support, but let's say don't ask again. We're using source tree for now. We may use these feature later on, and you can see like red stuff is not committed yet to the repository and so on. So, but for now, let's have a look. And it created our MMO instance. And the problem is that we need to add a reference to OWS plugin in, and it actually says it here, into our core build. And there are several other things to get it working. So first, let's check all the uproject files and the target build files. So for the Darkstar Chronicles project, you can see that that is our main project file. And you can see the plugins that we added earlier, like game features, modular gameplay, and we have OWS in here, but we need another entry for our MMO core plugin. So let's call it, let's select MMO core. So we added that to the default project or uproject file, so that stuff that we create later on, like blueprints that reference these C++ classes from OWS and MMO core, we need this plugin to be enabled. And also let's click in the Darkstar Chronicles build file. And as we can see, not many things are added here. So we will use this as a good opportunity to also configure this. What I usually also like to do is, let's say for the dependencies, let's put them into each line to better see it. So this is the standard stuff: core, uObject, engine, input core. And let's compare it how the OWS plugin, what it uses. So you can see also kind of like that he's using the gameplay ability, gameplay task, AI module. So I'm going to copy some stuff from here and add new things. So let's copy this. Paste this. And also what we want is, after that, we need the OWS plugin. And we need our MMO core plugin as well. We have the AI module, and there's other stuff that we need, like UMG for the user interfaces later on, so we can do this as well. And usually what I do is add a private dependency, kind of like Slate and Slate Core, which are the underlying C++ framework for the UMG stuff. And one thing that I also want to use is these JSON utilities that OWS uses, and put these also in. We might need to change or add stuff later on, and even put some stuff into private dependencies, depending on how we are going with that. So this is our Darkstar Chronicles build.cs. So we added OWS plugin, MMO core plugin, UMG, the JSON utilities. So this is basically what we need for that one. And now let's check our MMO core U plugin file. You can see there's nothing in there yet. So there are plugins that we need to enable as well. So we can copy like this, for example, or we need the OWS plugin. So we're adding a comma here, put the plugins underneath here. Then we also need another one, and we need to finish that off with a bracket and get rid of the comma. And for this, we need also the gameplay abilities later down the road. So our plugin itself has to define the plugins that it uses in its uplugin file. And the last thing we need to do is our core build file. And this is how it looks. So let's copy stuff from our Darkstar Chronicles file. Let's copy all of this. Put this in the public dependency module names. And of course, remove the MMO core entry and the core U object, which is in the private. And we can also, or rather to make it more understandable, put the core U object in here and remove these entries down there. And what we need here as well is kind of like the stuff from the OWS plugin build file. So let's copy messaging and this one, JSON utilities and HTTP, and put it here. So to recap, what we did is, so that you can understand it a little bit better, again, under the Darkstar Chronicles U project, we need to add the OWS plugin and the MMO core plugin entry to the U project file. The OWS was there before, and we had to add the MMO core with enabled true. Then we had to add several entries to the build.cs file. So the build.cs file, to make this clear again, is basically when you're running a build in Visual Studio or Writer, it triggers the Unreal header tool and the Unreal build tools. So they actually compile and do everything. So every macro is replaced with code and stuff is generated. This is all what happens in the background. And this build file, the C# file, defines all the modules that you need or that you are going to use code from. So basically, if we click under Engine and see plugins, so not plugins, it's in Source, and Runtime, for example, you see all the modules that come with Unreal. Here you have the core module, the engine module, the gameplay ability, tags, and so on. So everything that we are kind of need to use classes from, we need to input into the build file, either as public or private dependencies. And right now we are using just public dependencies for now. So we need to place every kind of module that we're using in this section here. And the same thing needs to be done for our plugin as well, which also has a build file. And this is why we also add these classes or these modules in here when we're using classes from these modules, like inheriting from them and doing other stuff. So, because like what we did with our MMO game instance class, it cannot find the OWS game instance because we didn't include the files yet. That is why we include it in here, and also in the MMO core build file, put all the necessary stuff in there. And if we hit compile, then it should compile and find it. And you can see there will be some warnings, and these warnings you can ignore because we're using Unreal Engine 5 and it's making changes to its API. So there will be warnings here that some assets were renamed to other assets, other names, like the fstring asset reference was renamed to fsoft object path, for example. And this needs to be changed later down the road in OWS, and it will be changed once the final release is there. It doesn't make sense now with early access and so on. So ignore these. If we hit build again, then you can see build succeeded. The warnings are not visible. So just ignore these warnings. They're not errors. And you can see that now our include does work. Don't mind the red label here. It just means that it's not committed to source control yet or to the repository. So, but you can see now we created our game instance, which inherits from the OWS game instance. And so now we have configured everything that we can now have the possibility of adding classes to our plugin, which use classes from OWS. And this is important when we create all the C++ classes for the user interface screens and the player controllers and so on and so forth. So right now we just see, okay, it works. We added our game instance, which we will add code to later on. But this was a good thing to get our plugin running that we inherit from a OWS class, get it working. And you've seen here that what we did. So we needed to add to the build files from our project file and our plugin build files and uPlugin and uProject files, all these different changes that we had to make. And before we finish this video, let's open up SourceTree, and under file status, you can see the changes that we did. So we added these new classes, game instance, core, it all was created, and the changes to the build file that we did. So let's create a comment, or let's say stage all. Let's create a comment and call it MMO core plugin added. Let's commit this. and push our changes to our Git repository. Changes were added, MMO core plugin added, you can see here. And here are our tags from last time, like episode 1, episode 2. So under history, let's right click again, add tag, call it episode 3. And one thing I kind of like forgot last time to mention, you also need to push the tag that we create to the repository. And so what we need to do now is right click on episode 3, push to origin, and so that this tag will also be visible in the online repository in DevOps. Okay, that's it for this video. So in the next video, we will import our fonts for the user interface that we will create. So I will show you places where to find fonts. I'm using Google Fonts. I show you the fonts that I'm using and how to then integrate or import those fonts into Unreal and configure them for the later use. And then once this is done, then we can finally start creating code, creating our login, our register, create character screens and stuff, the player controller, the login player controller, and so on and so forth. So after that, the fun really begins with a lot of coding. So thanks for watching and see you guys in the next one.